And today, we're honored to have with us here Stanton Freidman. Stanton Freidman is a nuclear physicist. He's worked for top companies including GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, and McDonnell Douglas. He contributed to highly advanced and classified programs involving nuclear aircraft, fission and fusion rockets. He's also worked on various compact nuclear power plants for space. Stan tells me he first became interested in UFOs in 1958. Since 1967, he has lectured about them at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in all 50 states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries. He has published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared on hundreds of radio and TV programs, including The Larry King Show. Stan is the original civilian investigator of the world-famous Roswell incident. He's co-authored numerous books, including The Definitive Study of the Roswell Incident and The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. He's provided testimony about UFOs to Congress and appeared twice at the United Nations. And just recently, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the International UFO Congress for his contributions to furthering research and knowledge about UFOs. We're honored that Stan agreed to be here today as part of our opening celebration for Encounters. Stan has also agreed to autograph copies of his book, which will be available at the Encounters retail shop after today's presentation. So please, everybody, join me in welcoming nuclear physicist and ufologist Stanton Freidman.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever talked in front of 4 screens. 2 I've done. Split personality, I guess. I do appreciate your coming out. This is more like, I live in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and yesterday morning when I left home it was 12 degrees. So it was good to be where it's warm. I wish it wasn't as wet, but can't win them all. The title of the presentation is Flying Saucers and Science. Just happens to be the title of one of my books, as you might expect. For some people, it is inappropriate to put flying saucers and science in the same sentence. They think it's all nonsense. There's no science there. That's not true. Totally wrong. Definitely incorrect. Although this month's Astronomy magazine has an article, The Science Behind UFOs. Cover story, which manages not to include any of the science. Very strange. I can say that and leave out all the good stuff. One of the problems one has with this subject is that so many of the people who speak out so strongly know so little. There are 4 basic rules for UFO debunkers. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble and nobody will know the difference anyway. When you listen to the debunkers, that's what you'll find, unfortunately. And they get a lot of airtime, a lot of airspace. So I'll try to hit on highlights of scientific data connected with flying saucers. And you can make your own choice. That's to cover the largest study ever done. They'd never know about it by listening to debunkers. It was done way back in 1955. Biggest study ever done. For the Air Force, mind you. The study was done by Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, which runs a few national labs these days. Very well respected organization. Their name isn't on the report. That was classified. And the picture there, Air Force put out a press release, October 1955. It which they talked about, soon we'll be building things that look like this picture, and don't worry about it, it's ours, there's nothing to flying saucers. Very straightforward. Here's what the Secretary of the Air Force said. On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I feel certain that even the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been obtained. Secretary of the Air Force, mind you. This seems very straightforward. Only 3% of the sightings couldn't be explained. It's just because there wasn't enough data, so let's forget all this nonsense about flying saucers. That's what the public was told. It was a lie, to be polite about it. Here's a breakdown of the sightings from Blue Book Special Report 14. Covered 3,201 sightings, which is a pretty good number. And you'll notice that the unknowns, the only ones we're really concerned about, were 21.5%. Now, how you make 3 into 21.5, I don't know. One easy way is to lie, and they did. You notice these other categories here: psychological aberration, crackpot cases, if you want, 1.5%. Now, the American Physical Society, to which I and most physicists belong, says that 2% of the papers submitted to it by physicists are crackpot papers. So there are more crackpots in physics than in flying saucers. I'm one of the few with a foot in each camp, you understand. 21.5%. And remember, the Secretary said if more complete observational data had been available, funny thing, they had a separate category for that. 9.3%. If there wasn't enough data to reach a conclusion, by definition, it was not listed as an unknown. Of course, the Secretary of the Air Force didn't tell you that. Now, not only did they break the things down by category, and there are a lot of things. If you were looking at drugs to cure cancer, if you got 21% that worked, you'd be in 7th heaven. 2% would do it. All he really wants 1. But on UFOs, 21.5% isn't good enough. Now, they did a quality evaluation of all those sightings. Here's a breakdown by quality and insufficient information. Now, the best cases, the excellent cases, 35% couldn't be identified. Only 18% of the poor cases. For insufficient information, as you might expect, fewer than 4% were listed as excellent. So what do we have? The better the quality of the sighting, because the background of the observer, the duration of observation, all that sort of stuff, the more likely to be unexplainable. It's exactly what you'd expect if the unknowns were really something different. They asked that question. They did a chi-square statistical analysis. Unknowns versus knowns. Do the two groups match? The probability that the unknowns are just misknowns was less than 1%. So the next time you hear somebody say, well, there's no difference, they're wrong. Flat out wrong. Excuse me. Now, this is the biggest study ever done, and you might expect that the debunkers would talk about it. No, they don't. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. Here are 2 other sources of information. On the left, the UFO evidence put out by Richard Hall of the old National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. 4,500 cases, 18% could not be identified. On the right, one of the best sources of information you can find from scientists, Congressional Symposium on Unidentified Flying Objects, hearings before the House Committee on Science and Astronautics, July 29th, my birthday, 1968. It wasn't held on that day because it was my birthday. 6 scientists testified in person, 6 more of us in writing. I was one of the latter group. I was the only one in the group without a PhD. Excuse me. And also the youngest of the group. So at the end of this month, there will be hearings at the National Press Club in Washington before 3 former congressmen from a number of professionals, number unknown yet, 20, 30, 40. It's going to go on all week. I'm the only one who was in the original group on this date, July 29th, 1968. A long time has gone by and there hasn't been much progress. Now what's special about the papers in this, it's 254 pages long. The best paper by far was by Dr. James E. McDonald, a professor of physics at the University of Arizona. His paper is 71 pages long, has information on 41 separate cases, including multiple witness radar visual sightings, sightings over big cities, sightings by professionals and by pilots, and even by astronomers. Outstanding paper. Jim had already talked to 500 witnesses. But of course, the noisy negativists won't tell you about good cases investigated by a top scientist. No, we don't want to talk about that. This is the scientific study of unidentified flying objects, usually called the Condon Report. The director of the study at the University of Colorado was Dr. Edward U. Condon. If you read the press releases at the time, scientific study shows no UFOs, no benefit to science from study of UFOs. UFOs nonsense, scientist shows, and a bunch of other balderdash. The book's 965 pages long. Let me summarize or give you what a special UFO subcommittee of the world's largest group of space scientists, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, they quietly pointed out that one could, in a publication, one could come to the opposite conclusions from Dr. Condon's. Any phenomena with 30% unknown is certainly worthy of further investigation. 30% of the 117 cases I studied in detail could not be identified. You won't find any of the news coverage telling you that. Many people think it showed that there wasn't anything to UFOs. Not so. Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Now, I get a real kick out of the SETI community. I call them cultists because they have the same attributes as people who follow a cult. There are aliens out there, they're not coming here, but they're sending us signals using techniques which we can receive and translate. Why that should be, I have no idea. There's no area of technology where we're using the same stuff that was used 300 years ago. First long-distance radio signals were received in 1901. And aliens out there are stuck with our level of technology. I don't use the slide rule anymore. I got a shock. I said that in front of a bunch of college students in Detroit. Looked around. Any of you know what a slide rule is? Not one! Boy, did it make me feel old. It was less than 50 years before when I'd been using the slide rule, you understand. Anyway, Allen was the Air Force scientific consultant on UFOs for over 20 years, chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University. He's got many dozens of cases that couldn't be identified. It's funny, the astronomical community who wants to say there's nothing to this won't talk about his book. You'd think he'd be the first place they go to. You don't want to hear from somebody who knows what he's talking about. Anyway, I get a little irate. Allen had an interesting astronomical lifespan. He came in with Halley's Comet in 1910, went out with Halley's Comet in 1986. Seems appropriate somehow. some stuff you probably haven't seen before. And one of the big arguments against flying saucers is every scientist knows you can't get here from there, right? Well, you can't on a bicycle or in a dumb old chemical rocket. That doesn't mean you can't get here. It means you can't use old school technology. Back in 1958, which seems forever ago, I was a pretty young nuclear physicist working on nuclear airplanes for General Electric. It wasn't a small program. That year we spent $100 million. General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department in Cincinnati. We employed 3,500 people. 1,100 of them were engineers and scientists. That one year. And back then, $100 million was a lot of money. What you have here is 2 jet engines down below. There's a nuclear reactor in there, kind of old-fashioned one. And you heated the air and pumped the air through the engines, and you had a nuclear engine. We never did fly one, unfortunately. When it came time to fish or cut bait, they cut bait. The nice thing about a nuclear airplane, it had unlimited range. Fly for thousands of hours without refueling. That's pretty neat. That was in 1958. The program was canceled in 1961. Here's what a flight type system would look like. Reactor in there. These are control rods. Air comes in, gets heated in the reactor to about 1,800 degrees, mind you, and shoved through the turbines, and away you go. General Electric had a program, and Pratt Whitney, which also built engines, had a program too. Both canceled. Nuclear ramjet. Ling Temco bought. The idea of this one is you carry it aloft with a big B-52 and a bunch of H-bombs, and you could hit any target on the surface of the planet. We're really good at figuring out ways to kill people. My definition of Earth from an alien viewpoint is a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. It's not as bad as you might think. That's fairly accurate. Anyway, none of these got off the ground. Here's what's really interesting. Fission nuclear rockets. That's a man in the middle so you can get some idea of the size of these things. And different power levels. The power levels are rather impressive. But these are drawings. Let's see if we can show you a real one. This is a schematic of how they work. You bring in cold hydrogen, run it through the reactor, and it goes out at 4,000 degrees. And there's no oxidizer. And this would triple the payload you could put on a regular rocket by using a nuclear upper stage. We didn't just talk about these things. Here's the Westinghouse one. Reactors in the middle. Nozzle. There's a person up here so you get an idea of the scale. This was a fairly small one, 1,100 megawatts power rating. To compare that, Grand Coulee Dam produces 2,200 megawatts. It's a little larger, you might notice. This was operated in 1968, successfully. Here's one. They get radioactive after you operate them for a while, so you have to remotely move them. Los Alamos built one. Well, the Phoebus reactor, go back, looks like that. A little larger, about 8 feet in diameter. Power level, 4,400 megawatts. Twice the power of Grand Coulee Dam. This is real. This is not a Walt Disney thing. And when I was listening to Hours operating, they played it over the PA system at Westinghouse. I'll tell you, nobody knew how long this thing would run. There was a limit, an hour, because of the amount of hydrogen you have to store. And when you got 10 minutes, 20 minutes, temperature nominal, pressure nominal, half the people expected the thing was going to blow up out of the test site. 30 minutes, 40 minutes, it went the full 60 minutes. Boy, there was joy. Then, of course, the program got canceled. What are you going to do? Fission nuclear rockets. There's one in operation. Area 51 is over the hill there. And those are tanks of liquid hydrogen. And you don't want to be near these things when they're operating. Now, nuclear fusion. Whether you realize it or not, the most important source of energy in the universe, not just our solar system or our galaxy, but the universe, is nuclear fusion. That's what produces the energy of the sun and all the other stars. Now, we're smart guys on this planet. We figured out in 1938 that fusion is the process that produces the energy in the stars. We didn't do anything about it. That was theoretical. And the war came along. We had the Manhattan Project. We were making our progress toward high energy production in small packages. A big bomb in 1944 released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. It took a big B-29 to carry it. The next year, our first A-bomb, 18,000 tons of TNT, a bomb. We're not pikers. By 1952, we built Mike, first fusion device. Released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. So you go from 10 to 18,000 to 10 million in less than 10 years. And you say, who cares? Let's hope we don't use them on people. Well, I agree with that. We care because you can go to the stars with a fusion propulsion system. I worked on a study of that in 1961. All it takes is money. It's complex. It's difficult. It takes a lot of people who work in all the parts of the system. And certainly mankind isn't ready to go to the stars. We need to pay a little more attention to what's going on here, I think. But these are different fusion reactions. And it is a little important. 18.3 MeV, million electron volts. It's a measure of energy. So what does that mean? Normal chemical reactions, 5, 10, 20 electron volts. One fusion reaction, 18 million electron volts of energy. And if you produce it in charged particles, you can direct them out the back end. If you produce neutrons, they're a pain in the end. Pain in the butt, yeah. Neutrons are a pain because they go out in all directions. And you want the rocket to go that way, so the particles better go that way. But, so you pick the reaction. There's a big study in England about this. Number of papers. But it's really very impressive when you stop to think about, instead of lighting a match, 10 electron volts, one fusion reaction, 18 million electron volts. We're getting there, man. It's making progress, it says here. Okay. Now, I wanted to go through that because I keep hearing people talking about, oh, it's a huge universe, the galaxy is so big we can't possibly get out there or anyplace else. It would take a rocket that would weigh millions of tons. Yeah, a dumb old chemical rocket. Can you get from here to the West Coast in a day? Of course not. I can't walk fast enough to do that. And you say, but you don't need to walk. Oh. You don't need to use chemical rockets. When I first did computer stuff, way back in the early, in the 50s, you filled out input data sheets, a girl key punched them on cards, and she took a box of IBM cards and a huge reel of tape up to another building that you didn't get near, and brought you back a pile of output. My desk computer has far more power than that big computer up the hill had. Progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. Don't talk about using yesterday's technology to solve tomorrow's problems. It doesn't work that way. So, never mind the saucer. You see the guys we're driving? Does a nuclear physicist believe in little green men? Well, they're not green. They're usually little, whether they're men or women, I don't know. Well, there are some interesting stories, let's put it that way. Do I believe that Earthlings have seen aliens? Of course I do, because of individual cases. And as a matter of fact, one of the important parts of the phenomenon is the physical trace cases. There is no physical evidence. It's hogwash. Ted Phillips in Missouri has collected 5,200 cases from 95 countries of people seeing a saucer on or near the ground. And when it leaves, one finds physical changes, the equivalent of burn surface, burn rings, landing gear marks, little footprints. 1/6 of those cases involve reports of little guys connected with the saucer. 1/6 of 5,200 is, over 800 cases. That doesn't count the abduction cases. So, yeah, there is evidence for guys who are driving. Here's one of those physical trace cases. This is Delphos, Kansas, way back in the 70s. Ronnie Johnson, age 16, was doing his chores for the evening. Looks up, and there's a thing sitting right over this ring. There wasn't a ring there. Round object, brightly lit, so bright he's temporarily blinded, making no noise. He's standing gawking at this thing. It finally takes off. He dashes into the house, tells his folks. They go out, they see it too. When they go back, here's this dry ring of soil. Down 14 inches in the soil, it was changed. Right out. 14 inches. Ted sent me samples of the soil. I found a good testing lab in Los Angeles. Had the soil tested. It had a higher level of soluble minerals than the normal soil from a few feet away. It was too salty to grow anything. And that soil didn't grow anything for years. Probably microwaved. And the farmer did not have a big microwave, believe me. But you've heard that, of course, that there is no physical evidence. That's ring soil on the left, normal soil on the left, ring soil on the right. You can see how it's been changed. As I said, a higher level of soluble minerals. Famous case, Betty and Barney Hill and their dog. That's not the alien. 1961, New Hampshire. They were driving along out in the middle of nowhere. Betty spots this thing in the sky, tells Barney she's watching something strange. Oh, Betty, it's a Piper Cub, don't worry about it. They keep driving, it's late at night, nobody around. And it moves strangely, it goes around. Came around, they saw it next to the Old Man of the Mountain, which was a famous formation up there, a rock formation, which unfortunately a few years ago fell into the lake. But they saw it next to the Old Man of the Mountain, and it was 1.5 times the size, which is 48 feet for that, so it was 72 feet in diameter. Oh, but the debunkers say, that was Jupiter. That's a pretty neat trick for Jupiter to fly around in the sky and appear to be 72 feet in diameter. I mean, absolute nonsense. But that doesn't stop the debunkers. Anyway, it came close, near them. Barney gets out of the car, he's standing with binoculars. Here's this thing sitting in the sky, 70, 80 feet in diameter maybe. There's windows, double row. Looks through and there are strange beings staring back at him. Gets very frightened, dashes back to the car, tells Betty, we're going to be captured. Drives away, does two things he would never have done. He goes off the main highway to a secondary highway and then onto a dirt road. And there's something in the road up ahead. Jams on the brakes. Little guys came along. Take him on the driver's side, Betty on the other side. Carry them, literally. And take them up a ramp and in, on board this craft, which had landed in the only place you could land one in that area, sandy area. They get put in separate rooms. They get examined physically. This goes on for a couple hours. They get put back out, told they wouldn't remember what happened and didn't. Until 2 years later, after physical symptoms showed up, and they realized they had missing time because they got home 2 hours later than they should have gotten home. They finally wind up in the office of Dr. Benjamin Simon, a world-famous psychiatrist whose specialty after World War II was treating shell-shock war veterans. PTSD, ran a hospital that had 3,000 beds for those guys. He didn't know anything about flying saucers, but he sure knew one heck of a lot about helping people get through a traumatic experience. You know, your buddy's head gets blown off next to you in battle. It's hard to handle. And he is on record as saying that the emotional intensity as they relived their experience under hypnosis, separate sessions, 10 each, was as great as that of any of the war veterans he treated. The Army made a movie, Let There Be Light, starring Ben Simon, how to handle this. And I think you're all aware that today, coming back from Afghanistan, there are plenty of people with PTSD. Back then, more of them died because you didn't have as good medical care. Now they die and they suffer from this post-traumatic stress disorder. Anyway, one of the important things about this story is that Betty, under hypnosis, is reliving a part of this, and she's telling Dr. Simon how she's trying to get the leader to tell her where he's from. They're in separate rooms. I know you're not from around here, the understatement of the week. And he shows her a three-dimensional model, projection, whatever it is. Bunch of points of light, which are stars, and lines between them, trade routes, occasional expeditions. And Dr. Simon gives her a post-it, well, he asks her, you know, where are you on the map? She asks him, well, do you know where you are on a map? No, I don't know anything about astronomy. Well, how can I tell you where I'm from if you don't know where you're at? End of discussion. Dr. Simon asks her if she can remember what the map looks like. She says yes. He gives her a post-it note suggestion. Please draw it later on, if you can remember it accurately. She does that at home. It's in the book, the first book, The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. And the problem is, what sense can you make out of that? Well, this woman made sense out of it, Marjorie Fish. You can see how long ago the picture was taken. You see the color of my hair. Marjorie built more than 25 three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood to try to find a three-dimensional pattern that matched the two-dimensional one Betty had drawn. Hard to get good data back then on distances. She did. Eventually, she found, this is one of the models she built, 250 stars in it. A lot of work. She came up with a pattern that matched angle for angle, line length for line length, what Betty had drawn. She was pretty happy about it. I was the first to publish about that work. Some special results. She was able to identify the base stars, the two stars down here. I can't tell if you can read that or not. Anyway, the base stars are Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. It's a constellation of Reticulum, the net, that means in Latin. And the sun is up here. And it turns out that all the pattern stars are the same kind as the sun, and all the same kind of stars as the suns, unlike stars in this region of space, are part of the pattern. And the base stars are very special as it happens. We didn't know this before. Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 are the closest to each other pair of sun-like stars in our entire local neighborhood. We're out in the boondocks, 4.3 light years from the nearest star. These guys from each other, an eighth of a light year. They're 30 times closer than we are the next star over. And oh, by the way, those two stars are a cool billion years older than the sun. So if you're on a planet around one, you can see the other star all day long, and you can directly run tests, we know how to do them, to determine whether there's biological life on the planets around those stars. Quite remarkable. And if they were a billion years older than us, then they had a little more time to develop interstellar travel, one would think. And more incentive because they know there's somebody over there. Very exciting piece of work. Astronomy Magazine did an article about it, ran letters for a year, and they put out this 32-page full-color booklet. I had suggested they do the article in the first place. And then Carl Sagan's lawyer threatened to sue them because his name was on it, since he was one of the people who sent him letters that are included. So they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I wound up with 18,000 copies in my garage in California. They're all gone, long gone, when I moved to Canada. It got more response than anything they'd ever published. And the misrepresentation continued from the critics, of course. The woman who was standing there with me, Marjorie Fish, is also a bit of a sculptress, and based on Barney's eyewitness testimony under hypnosis, this is what they look like. Your typical Zeta Reticulum. What else can I say? I don't know many, as you might imagine. Here's our new book. My co-author, Kathleen Martin, is Betty's niece. Has all the hypnosis tapes. I'm hoping someday she'll speak right here in town. She's head of abduction research for the Mutual UFO Network, which you might be interested in knowing, receives about 600 UFO sighting reports per month. People are always asking me, how come I haven't heard about any sightings recently? 600 a month is a pretty good number. MUFON Journal comes out every month. I write a column in it. The book has done well. I'm very pleased about it. Kathy did 85% of the work. And they put my name first, in case somebody is wondering. I complained when I saw the suggested cover. It's her book, not mine. Stan, you're better known. It'll sell more if your name is first. What do you tell a publisher when he tells you that? No, I don't want it to sell. Hardly. A lot of work goes into writing a book. Then we have Roswell. Now you've heard a lot of malarkey about Roswell. More phony stories, phony people, vicious misrepresentation. A guy who is now a senator from Minnesota, did a television show, and he said, well, that couldn't have been a big story if it only appeared in the Roswell paper. I had sent the broadcaster copies of articles from the front page of half a dozen big newspapers. He hadn't looked at what they'd given. Chicago Daily News, pretty good sized paper. Los Angeles Herald Examiner, the Sacramento Bee, a whole slew of them. So it did make it out of Roswell, believe me, it did. Now I found out about this. Now there's some confusion here. I advertised myself as the original civilian investigation of the Roswell incident. Oh, Stan, so you were there in 1947? No, I was 13 years old in 1947. In 1978, I was giving a lecture at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. And I was supposed to do 3 interviews at a television station. I did the first 2 earlier in the day. The third reporter was nowhere around, and the station manager was giving me coffee. He's looking at his watch. He knows the people who brought me to the station, so he knows I have other things to do. And out of the blue, he says, you know, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And brilliant investigator that I am, I said, who's he? His next sentence changed my life. He handled the wreckage of one of those saucers you were interested in when he was in the military. What? Where'd that come from? What do you know about him? He lives in Houma. I didn't know where Houma, Louisiana was. Been there since to talk to Jesse, but he's a great guy. We're old ham radio buddies. You ought to talk to him. The reporter showed up. I did the interview. Next morning, checked information in Houma, found Jesse, talked to him. And he told me his story. Now, he's one of the people who couldn't deny it. I didn't find that out until later. But his name was in newspapers all over the country. So people say, why did he go running to you? He didn't. I found him. He and the station manager were old ham radio buddies. They knew each other, indeed. So he told me his story, filed it for a brief while, heard a second story up in Bemidji, Minnesota. There was a third story from an Englishman, an English actor, who went driving across the country from Los Angeles to Philadelphia. Heard on the radio about a crash saucer in New Mexico. He could pin down the date. Jesse couldn't pin down a precise date. Early July 1947, my colleague went to the University of Minnesota Library, started checking the periodicals. There was a story. Loads of papers. Gave us other names. That began a 1.5 years of hard work, and we found 62 people connected with the case. This was before the internet, which makes it a lot harder, believe me, and it was more expensive, too. But we found them. The first book came out, The Roswell Incident, in 1980, by Bill Moore and Charles Perlitz. I got a chunk of Bill's royalties. Kept up the research. By 1986, it was 92 people. Came out with my own book with Don Berliner, an aviation reporter, a few years later. Crash at Corona, because Corona is the nearest town to where it actually happened, a small town. They love me in Corona. Used to be a movie there, and on the marquee during the 50th anniversary celebration of Roswell. Forget about Roswell. It all happened here. They like my book being Crash at Corona. Anyway, an important event, one of 3 crashes that occurred within a year. There's the Roswell Daily Record. RAAF, that is not Royal Australian Air Force, as somebody tried to insist to me. Roswell Army Airfield. Really, that's what it is. And captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. I've had people tell me they never called it a flying saucer back then. That's the Roswell paper, July 8th, 1947. They sure as heck did. Here's a map of New Mexico. The biggest military base in the United States is White Sands Missile Range. Roswell's over here. It's in the middle of nowhere, 200 miles from Albuquerque, and Amarillo, which is up there. And yet, thousands of people come there every year. It's not on the way to anywhere. The worldwide interest in this subject is very large. There will be an annual festival July 5th, 6th, 7th this year, and I will be there. Give 3 lectures. There's Jesse Marcel. That's not real saucer wreckage. They went out and got themselves a radar reflector weather balloon combination and passed it off and got away with it. This is right after the war. If the government said something, you believed them. Why would they lie? You can think of a lot of reasons now, but that was taken in the office of General Ramey. Roger Ramey headed the 8th Air Force. Marcel was there when a sheriff came in with pieces of wreckage. That looked very strange. He'd never seen anything like it. The sheriff called the base. Marcel went out, looked at the stuff, told his boss, Colonel Blanchard. The rancher said that there's a huge amount of this debris out on my ranch, and my sheep won't cross it. Are you guys going to clean this up or not? Well, Colonel Blanchard ordered Jesse, take the counterintelligence corps guys. They worry about spies. That's what Blanchard was worried about. Remember, this is the most elite military group in the entire world. They dropped the 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, atomic bombs. They dropped 2 more during Operation Crossroads in '46. They would expect that there would be spies around in New Mexico. A lot of other classified stuff going on too, but anyway. So he was instructed to take a counterintelligence corps guy out. They spent overnight. They brought back 2 cars full of this stuff, leaving most of it out there. They got back to the base. Colonel Blanchard sends one of his B-29s with some of this wreckage off to the headquarters of the 8th Air Force, of which they're part in Fort Worth, Texas. And this picture is taken in the office of General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force. Colonel Blanchard, incidentally, went on to be a 4-star general and was Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force when he died of a massive heart attack. People said he must have been sent to Siberia for being so stupid as to put out this press release. No way, Jose. That's General Ramey on the left, Colonel Dubose on the right. He's holding a piece of paper in his hand. And with modern, sophisticated techniques, you can read that piece of paper. And it talks about victims of the wreck. This was taken on the day when all this was coming down. Most balloons don't have victims. Don't make much of a wreck either. So we got the first 2 explanations. Flying saucer captured on ranch in Roswell region. Just a radar reflector weather balloon combination. And Jesse was told, you don't say anything. I'll take care of it, says the general. He explained it away. That was 2 explanations. The third one was a mogul balloon. Super secret mogul balloon, spy balloon. Actually, it was a string of balloons, about 20 of them at 20-foot intervals, standard, conventional, normal weather balloons. Not highly classified at all. The purpose of these launches was classified, constant altitude, so you could listen for the blast of a Soviet nuclear test, which supposedly could be heard from thousands of miles away in the upper atmosphere. So the purpose was classified. They didn't fly airplanes accompanying the flights of these balloons. They were left to rot in the desert. Ranchers tended to pick them up because they don't want the sheep or the cattle eating them. Not good